Hello, a warm welcome to all. This is going to be about the James Ossuary. It's coming off of a video I saw the other day on Jacob Berman's YouTube channel, and I didn't think it was particularly good. Jacob has been trying to, God love him, he's been trying to hold on to the notion of an historical Jesus for quite a long time now. I had done some fairly extensive research into this ossuary and come down on quite firmly on the, at least with the conclusion that it cannot be positively identified as what many people claim it to be. It's most likely a forgery. It's certainly not positive evidence for Jesus in the first century. Any kind of archaeology of Jesus in the first century is decidedly lacking, and this is most likely a forgery. Jacob is still trying to hold on to. He maintained for a very long time that there was still some personage there in the first century who we could call Jesus, even though he freely acknowledges that most of the biblical accounts are fictional or mythic in origin. There's so many people still do, unfortunately, and some very renowned scholars still hold on to this paradigm of an historical Jesus. This archaeology here, this ossuary, is most likely, as I said, a forgery. I'm going to take you through why many scholars believe it to be a forgery, and it is certainly, and I got a bit annoyed here because Jacob and this other fella in his video were saying this is positive proof, it's certain, it must be, and no, not at all. And we're going to find out actually why it is most likely a forgery, and it cannot be attested to certainly be the bone box of Jesus, of James, the brother of Jesus. The brother of Jesus element to the inscription we find on this ossuary is most likely fraudulent. It is we'll go through this and find out what we can. So the James Ossuary, a trapezoidal limestone bone box inscribed in Aramaic with the words Yaakov bar Yosef, Akiu de Yeshua, James son of Joseph, brother of Jesus, was revealed in 2002 to immense public interest. If authentic, the inscription would represent the earliest physical reference to Jesus of Nazareth. However, from the beginning, scholars have questioned whether the famous final phrase, Yakui de Yeshua, brother of Jesus, is authentic. The ossuary itself is genuine and ancient, but the inscription has been subject to extensive scrutiny. This essay synthesizes the valid arguments for forgery, drawing on paleographic, epigraphic, archaeological and scientific evidence, while some experts, notably Andre Lemaire and Ada Yardeni, argue for authenticity. The balance of evidence suggests that the inscription is composite, with the final words likely added later. First, we'll go through a little preamble here about the ossuary itself. The ossuary here is an authentic first century limestone ossuary. Its shape is non-standard trapezoidal, 20 inches long, 10 inches wide at one end and 12 at the other, resembling a truncated Egyptian mummy case. This custom-made design suggests it was commissioned by someone of means. The box itself is not forged, but the question lies in the inscription. Okay, paleographic evidence. Two distinct parts. The inscription is clearly divided into two parts. Part 1, Yaakov bar Yosef, James, son of Joseph, executed in formal inscriptional cursive, well-spaced, balanced, and wedge-like with wedge-like flourishes on Beit, Resh, and Yod. Part 2, Yehudi de Yeshu, brother of Jesus, a looser informal cursive with inconsistent letter forms, archaic throwbacks, and lack of wedges. The letter form anomalies in part 2. Okay, so this is going to get a bit technical. Sorry about this, but it's worth laying out here. The Ayin, sharply angled in part 2, curved and clumsy in part 1. Sorry, curved and clumsy in part 2. Yod, upright and neat in part 1. Slanted, distorted, and wedgeless in part 2. Shin, wedge-tipped and graceful in part 1. Plain, stiff, wedgeless in part 2. Chet, archaic, eared form in part 2. Obsolete by the 1st century CE. Dalet, the most problematic letter, rendered in part 2 without the expected top cup, resembling instead a Greek epsilon. Why? No known Hebrew cursive Dalet takes this form. I'll put this in the show notes, I think, just so you can reread it if you want. These paleographic mismatches strongly indicate the two different hands, possibly separated by centuries, were responsible. And I'm going to put some links here to articles in the show notes so you can confirm this yourselves. Carving and placement, part 1, balanced, framed, and carefully placed, about 1 hand space from the edge of the ossuary. Part 2 disrupts the balance, drifts in alignment, it drifts downwards, and shows no evidence of framing either. Okay, frame issue. Altman argues that part 1 originally had a protective carved frame, standard in formal inscriptions, that was erased to allow addition of part 2. This remains debated, but the absence of a frame around the part 1 is unusual. No, but the absence of a frame around part 1 is unusual. Okay, I thought that would be part 2. Let me just, but it's certainly drifts downwards, and that is quite strange. And you would expect it to be that way if it had indeed been the second part had been forged. Archaeological context. Standard ossuary inscriptions. Nearly all ossuaries from the period use a simple patronymic formula: X son of Y. Okay, or occasionally X daughter of Y. This suffice to distinguish individuals in family tombs, right? So that's all you would usually have. Father, son of the father. One of hundreds of inscriptions inscribed ossuaries catalogued, e.g. Rahmani's catalogue of Jewish ossuaries in the collection of the State of Israel. Virtually none carry brother of designations. The James Ossuary would thus be an outlier. Only 2 of 3 highly disputed cases of brother of formulas exist, making such an inscription statistically anomalous. So this is what we would expect to find if indeed it was a forgery. If authentic, the James Ossuary would be the only securely known case where a person's brother is recorded, and that brother happens to be Jesus. This creates a high likelihood of intentional fabrication. Jacob, son of Joseph, was a common name contribution, but only by adding a brother of Jesus would the ossuary become unique and valuable. It was a common name combination. But here we go. I mean, very quickly here, I want to say the idea that that the early church, the cosmic church, if you like, the mythicist, if you like, church of the 1st century, this Jesus had a brother, is all later fabrication. I went through the brother of quote again very recently, and if you remember the original epistle of James, in the forward to that, in the introduction to that letter, there is no designation that James is the brother of Jesus whatsoever. So we're not left with anything here in the early times that would even designate James as a brother of this cosmic Lord. This is all later. This all comes about later. So scientific evidence. Patina tests. Okay, this is one way that they tested this thing. Israel Antiquities Authority, IAA, lab results 2003. The patina inside the letters of part 2 differed chemically from the ossuary surface patina. It appeared artificial, a hot water paste of chalk and marine microfossils, lacking the natural accretions found in cave patinas. Defense. Some counter-arguments claim cleaning, handling, or environmental differences could explain this, but the isotopic and microfossil mismatch remains a strong indicator of tampering, of some kind of tampering. So, and this was picked up in Jacob Berman's video, but I don't think this fella really. It might be that this is these two, the part 1 and part 2 aspects of this inscription are both ancient, and I think that's fair to say, and I would argue that, but there might be 200 or 300 years difference in them. They might have been 3rd or 4th century, the latter part of this. So it would also show us that it is still a forgery. It was added later. Now, I do think there might still be a case for this patina, and I'll show you why, being different from the original part 1, and that might still hold some shrift. But we'll continue any microscopy later. Letters in part 1 appear worn and consistent with age. Letters in part 2 cut through surface coating and show sharper edges, inconsistent with long-term burial. And the scholars are still, the scholarship is still confused on this point, or diverges on this point. Scholarly testimony, anyway. Support for forgery, or at least 2 hands. Kyle McCarter, Rochelle Altman, Yovel Goren, and the IAA epigraphers all judged that the inscription shows 2 different hands, with part 2 suspicious. Support for authenticity, though. Andre Lemaire and Ada Yoadin have argued that the whole inscription is ancient, possibly by one scribe with shifting style. So they have admitted, I suppose, according to this, that the style is also different, but it's the same hand and it's just shifted. I don't think so. Honestly, does it sound reasonable? Middle position. Some scholars accept the ossuary and part 1 as authentic, but remain agnostic about part 2. The motive for forgery, of course, is obvious. The ossuary trade is lucrative. Adding brother of Jesus would transform an ordinary ossuary, Jacob son of Joseph, very common names in antiquity, into a priceless relic. The forger would need only to add the extra words to elevate the artifact's importance. The conclusion then, the James Ossuary itself is a genuine 1st century artifact. However, the inscription almost certainly represents 2 phases: an original authentic Yaakov Bar Yosef and a later Yehudi de Yeshu. The paleographic inconsistencies, absence of a frame, irregular placement, unusual letterforms between anomalies, and most tellingly the anomalous use of brother of formula together make a compelling case for the second half being forged. While defenders point to possible scribal variation, the weight of the evidence supports the conclusion that the ossuary was deliberately altered to create a sensational Christian relic. The James Ossuary thus stands as a cautionary tale for modern forgery grafted onto an authentic ancient artifact. And of course it wasn't, some scholars of course have argued as well that it's important that this didn't come from an archaeological dig. It was just found on the antiquities market, and the provenance thereof of course would remain muddied, I suppose. One thing I wanted to do, and I put these 2 articles in the show notes so we can have a look. This was quite an interesting one. It's from Medcrave Online. Let me just go up here, what's it called? The Journal of Historical Archaeology and Anthropological Science. It seems to me to be quite a reputable article. and this journal seems to be reputable, and I liked this because it's 2017. So petrology examination. So this is the conclusion. The composition of the material that was collected from the letters carved ossuary led to the conclusion that the patina of the inscription is not a naturally formed one. It was probably created by grinding and dissolving a group of substances similar to those found in natural patina. Apparently, iron oxide-rich clay and granules of ancient charcoal were added to a mixture to impart a darker red tint that would match the natural colour of the limestone. I forgot to mention that this was this ossuary was originally given to the Board of Antiquities by someone who had forged material in his workshop. He was later vindicated, but there is a lasting problem, I think, with the Israel Antiquities Authority and corruption. I'll just leave that there. But the Nazareth problem as well is one of these things that this authority have striven to keep hold of and hold on to, even in the face of many people who have said that Nazareth didn't exist in the 1st century BC, and likely didn't as well into about the 1st century, the 2nd century AD. But here we go again, the paleography and epigraphy examination. This is important. Significant differences have been identified in the character fonts and inscribing styles between the first section, James, son of Joseph, and the second section, brother of Jesus. Specifically, the earlier font is embellished in the customary way for Second Temple inscriptions, while the later one is not. Okay, the early font is deeply and uniformly inscribed in the stone, and the latter font is shallower and irregular. These differences could indicate that the two parts of the inscription were produced by two different people. The latter inscriber of the second part was less particular about stylizing the characters as the earlier inscription had done. So you can check this out, and you'll see this. You do see this with your own eyes. The difference in the patina composition of the two sections of the inscription and the differences in the paleography and epigraphy result led to the conclusion that the two sections are not the same age. So yeah, I mean it's we have this as well as the Talpiot tomb. This is not good for Christians anyway, because the Talpiot tomb contains an ossuary of the son of Jesus, which wouldn't really conform well with the dominant Christian ideal that Jesus never had children. And the Mary Magdalene ossuary in that as well has been proven not to say Mary Magdalene. It was basically two Marys, or a Martha and a Mary. But yeah, it's all worth checking into and having a look at. I hope that wasn't too roundabout and too difficult to listen to there. It was a bit technical, but it's all worth, I think, thinking about here, because these are the only two, and I put these both in my book, by the way, in a couple of chapters. These are the only two examples of somewhat archaeological evidence in the 1st century, and they do appear just to be names that are similar to the names, some of the names we get in the New Testament. That's basically it. I'll leave that there. And remember, if we're talking about a celestial Jesus, first and foremost, who's then later made into a human and then has brothers, and then the brothers are put into the New Testament, then there's no reason to believe that James had anything, whoever James might have been, because there's no evidence for him in the 1st century either, and depending on how you date these letters. And of course, James's epistle says nothing about an historical Jesus. It's minimal on history, completely minimal. So we just have to consider all these things. I believe this is a forgery. I think the evidence sharply would fall into the category of it being put together by someone later on who Yeah, and yeah, I'll leave that there. Okay, cheers, bye bye.